Dusk is a retro-styled first-person shooter released in late 2018. With its low poly graphics, it definitely nails the style of a game from the 90s. Gameplay-wise, it's a refined mix of games from that 90s era of shooters. Dusk is made up of 3 episodes, each with 10 levels covering a variety of locations, and also each episode has a secret level. Each episode has a general theme: the foothills, the facilities, and the nameless city. So we go from rural farmsteads populated by cultists and men wearing sacks on their heads, to industrial and scientific places populated by soldiers, scientists, and walking experiments, before finally ending up in an otherworldly dark fantasy place populated by equally otherworldly denizens. To deal with this army of darkness, you get a selection of weapons. First, you've got a pair of sickles. They're pretty basic and not that great, but as a basic starter weapon they get the job done. Then we've got pistols. You start with just one, but that quickly becomes 2. They're an okay weapon. Next we have the lever action shotgun. Again, like the pistols, you can start with just one but then carry 2. These shotguns are pretty solid to use. They've got a nice rhythm to them. There is also the super shotgun, which I think overshadows the lever action shotguns by a mile. Next we've got an assault rifle and a hunting rifle. They both do what they say on the tin. Dusk also has a mortar, which is like a grenade launcher. Then there's the riveter, which is essentially a rocket launcher. There's also the crossbow, which is really the only standout and unique weapon in the game. The projectiles can fire through both walls and enemies. You can really mow down loads of enemies with it. There's also the sword, which is like a beefier version of the sickles. A lot of these weapons are quite plain and basic. I do wish that the game tried to have a few more interesting weapons. Like how Half-Life 1 had the Tau cannon and the gluon gun, and Doom had the BFG. Dusk doesn't really have anything like the BFG, but what it does have is the Fast Fire Totem, which is a power-up that lets you fire your weapons faster for a little bit. This lets you effectively clear out rooms of enemies, and even makes simple weapons like the pistol become very powerful. Dusk also has a bar of soap, which is essentially a one-hit kill for any enemy you throw it at, even bosses. I do wish that weapons in Dusk were laid out better. Having to press 8 or 9 to get to the riveter can be tricky in the heat of the moment. Whilst you could just scroll to it with the mouse wheel, that can be a bit tricky to precisely do in the middle of a fight. Half-Life 1 did this really well by having weapons sorted into categories. To access the crossbow in Half-Life, you just press 3 times. The game sort of acknowledges this idea since the sword and sickles are both in slot 1. But I just wish that the rest of the weapons in Dusk were sorted like this. Speaking of Half-Life, some enemies in Dusk are reminiscent of Half-Life's characters. Namely the scientists and the soldiers.
It's good to see you.
Other enemies in the game are a nice mixture of dark fantasy and horror, with a little bit of Quake 2 style cyborgs thrown in for good measure. My problem with a lot of enemies in Dusk is that they're quite simplistic. You've got melee enemies who run towards you to punch you in your face, and ranged enemies who potter about and shoot projectiles at you. A lot of the enemies are quite bland and samey from a gameplay perspective. With the exception of the penultimate boss Jacob, who acts a lot more like a player would. There isn't anything as in-depth as the Marines from Half-Life. The enemies you do have in Dusk though are quite solid, and they do get the job done, but it just leaves me longing for something more to really take it to the next level. At the same time though, we have the Wendigo, which is a very spooky enemy who's invisible until you damage it, but you can hear it breathing and you can see its bloody footprints leaving a trail on the ground. There's also the Horrors who you can hear breathing before you've alerted them, and then they start charging at you with their gaping mouth. The game effectively conveys a strong and creepy atmosphere, even with the low poly graphics. It makes good use of particle effects, lighting and sound. The game also has an excellent soundtrack to take things to the next level. For the most part, a lot of the level design in Dusk is pretty solid. With the more open sections of the game you can really bunny hop around at a high speed. I think the gameplay is strongest here when the solid movement mechanics get a lot of time and space to shine. At the same time though, we have some sections that are very cramped. Sometimes it works quite well though for the horror atmosphere that the game's trying to achieve. At other times though, it just feels a bit unimaginative. There's too many boring tight corridors and bland caves. In one level, the Infernal Machine, there's a few sections that are reminiscent of Half-Life's residue processing. Except it's even worse because you're crouched and moving slowly through these gore-drenched tunnels. Overall though, most levels tend to be well designed, though in the last few levels of Episode 3 the game decides to have more of a plot. I get what it's trying to do here, but I just don't think it works too well. Also, the secret levels aren't that interesting. Other games with secret levels try to at least mix things up a bit more. Quake 1 had Ziggurat Vertigo with its low gravity, and even Quake 2 had a bunch of levels with a gimmicky theme. But in Dusk, the first two secret levels just feel like extensions of the existing episode's levels. And then Episode 3 has the Ratacombs, which is basically just a bunch of dark tunnels filled to the brim with rats. The game even hangs a lantern on this. I hate rats. I get it, it's meant to be a cathartic experience where a ton of rats explode, but the dark tunnels just mean you get lost and end up walking in circles until you find the right door to open. Dusk goes quite crazy with secrets, however. Some levels have as many as 10. Some are as simple as hitting the use key on a wall, or sometimes just breaking something to get through. Others are tucked away behind non-solid walls. Others require you to play basketball. The game also lets you stack up barrels and crates. At times you can use this to climb over a fence or through a window that you'd otherwise need a key to get through. In this way it's very reminiscent of Deus Ex. Much like Deus Ex, Dusk also has swimming. The game takes on 6 degrees of movement when you're swimming, so it makes things a bit disorientating. The game has a variety of difficulties, though from what I can tell it just speeds up the attack speed of enemies and their projectiles, and also ups the damage. Sadly, unlike the original Doom, playing on a different difficulty doesn't affect the number of enemies in a level. At the end of the game, the source of that glowing green power that's been pervasive throughout the game is revealed. I'll just say Natalie instead. Natalie is voiced by Stephen Waite, who voiced Caleb in Blood.
Open for business. No, it's just me.
Anyway, overall I think Dusk has a pretty solid foundation. It's just a little rough around the edges here and there, and I think it could be a lot deeper. You can tell that a lot of love went into making this game. It's definitely a love letter to 90s shooters.
Thank you.